The late September sun hung low over the endless fields of golden corn, stretching in every direction like a living ocean that swayed in rhythm with the gentle breeze. Harvest season was always my favorite time of the year, not because it was easy, but because it reminded me of who I was and where I came from. Out here, I didn't need anyone else's approval or interference. Out here, not just any Karen, but the kind of woman who thrived on confrontation, who believed rules existed to be bent in her favor but enforced like iron against everyone else. She had taken it upon herself to become the self-proclaimed sheriff of the neighborhood, constantly patrolling, snapping pictures, and writing letters filled with legal threats that sounded scarier than they really were. She didn't like me, and she made no effort to hide it. To her, my farm was a blemish, an embarrassment, something she wished she could. Farming taught you discipline, because machines didn't forgive carelessness. Once I climbed into the tractor and fired it up, the entire world seemed to narrow to the rows in front of me and the task at hand. Hours passed as I worked methodically, filling the grain wagon, emptying it into the bins, then starting the process over again. Sweat clung to my neck, my back ached, but there was satisfaction in the progress, the way the field slowly transformed from tall standing stalks into neat-cut rows that revealed the rich, dark earth beneath. It was hard work, but it was honest. Around midday, I decided to bring the tractor closer to the property line near the road that separated my farmland from the HOA-controlled subdivision. It wasn't unusual for me to work that stretch during harvest, but I knew it always drew attention. People driving by in their SUV. Karen's SUV jolted sideways, her tires screeching as she tried to regain control, finally coming to a stop half on the road, half in the shallow ditch. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the hiss of her overheated engine and the faint crackle of her voice still carrying through her phone call. My heart hammered in my chest as I climbed down from the tractor, inspecting the damage. The side panel. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice, because anger wasn't going to help. "You hit my tractor, Karen," I said firmly, pointing to the obvious gash along its side. "You weren't paying attention. Look at what you've done." But she wasn't having it. She started ranting about how my farm junk had no business being so close to the neighborhood, how tractors should stay off the road, how the HOA would hear about this. Her words tumbled out in a shrill, defensive stream, designed to shift blame and paint herself as the victim. It was classic Karen, twisting the truth until it barely resembled reality. Still, this wasn't just some petty argument about fence heights or lawn ornaments. This was property damage, clear and undeniable, and I wasn't about to let her wriggle out of it with her usual theatrics. I pulled out my phone and snapped pictures of the damage, both to my tractor and her Lexus, making sure to capture the skid marks on the pavement and the position of her vehicle in the ditch. "I'm reporting this," I told her flatly, and that's when her expression shifted from anger to something else, panic. She tried to wave me off, insisting we could handle it privately, but I knew what that meant. It meant she wanted me to stay quiet while she found a way to spin the story to her advantage. Not this time. I dialed the non-emergency police line and explained the situation, giving them my location. As I waited, I leaned against my tractor, arms crossed, watching Karen pace back and forth, muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. Cars began to slow down, neighbors peeking out from porches to see what the commotion was about. It wasn't every day that the HOA's queen bee found herself stuck in a ditch after sideswiping farm equipment. For once, the spotlight she loved so much was shining on her for all the wrong reasons. I knew the police would come soon, and when they did, the truth would be laid out for everyone to see. The sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later, his cruiser pulling up slowly with its lights flashing blue and red against the golden backdrop of the cornfields. I recognized him right away, Deputy Mark Wilson, a local man who had gone to school with me years back. He was a good man, level-headed and fair, the type who had dealt with enough HOA complaints to know when someone was crying wolf. As soon as he stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the gravel shoulder, Karen pounced on him like a predator spotting prey. "Officer," she screeched, rushing toward him, pointing at me like I was some criminal. "You need to arrest him immediately. He had his farm machinery too close to the road." It's reckless, it's dangerous, and he damaged my car. Mark raised his hand calmly, gesturing for her to slow down. Ma'am, take a breath. Let me hear what happened from both sides, he said in his steady tone, the kind of voice that didn't bend to theatrics. I could see the irritation in Karen's eyes. She wasn't used to being told to wait her turn. She huffed but quieted down, her arms crossed, tapping her foot like a spoiled child. When he turned to me, I explained exactly what had happened. I told him how I'd been harvesting along the property line, how my tractor was completely in my lane, how Karen came down the road distracted and clipped my equipment. I showed him the photos I had taken, the damage, the skid marks, the position of her Lexus in the ditch. Mark inspected the scene himself, running his hand along the dented tractor panel, then crouching down to look at the angle of the tire tracks. It didn't take a genius to see the truth. The evidence spoke for itself. Karen had crossed over, not me. But that didn't stop her from unleashing another wave of excuses once Mark turned back to her. He shouldn't even be operating that thing so close to our subdivision, she yelled, gesturing wildly toward my field. It's noisy, it's dusty, it lowers our property values. I've told the HOA about this before, but they refuse to do anything. This man is a menace. He's deliberately trying to harass me with his farm junk. I couldn't help but shake my head. It was the same old song and dance with her, except this time the stakes were higher. This wasn't about noise or aesthetics, it was about negligence and property damage. Mark didn't look impressed. Ma'am, farming equipment is permitted to operate on these roads. He has every right to work his land. What I see here is that your vehicle made contact with his tractor. His words were calm but carried weight, and I watched as Karen's face twisted in disbelief, as though the universe itself had betrayed her by not bending to her will. Are you kidding me? She shrieked. I pay HOA dues. I keep this community in line. And you're going to take his side? Look at my car, it's totaled. She pointed at the front of her Lexus, where the bumper was cracked and the headlight shattered, pieces of plastic dangling like broken teeth. To her, the car was more than just a vehicle, it was her symbol of status, her way of showing everyone she was above them. Now that it was wounded, her pride bled with it. Mark jotted notes on his pad, unmoved by her outburst. I'll need your license, registration, and insurance, ma'am, he said. The words hit her like a slap. She stammered, fumbling through her purse, producing the documents with exaggerated annoyance, muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. When he asked me for my license and tractor registration, I handed them over without hesitation. I had nothing to hide. Farming meant keeping your paperwork in order, because officials always came around sooner or later, whether for inspections, zoning, or complaints. As the deputy stepped aside to radio in the information, Karen marched up to me, her heels sinking slightly into the soft shoulder of the road. She leaned close, her voice sharp and venomous. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed. Well, let me tell you something, you're finished. I'll have the HOA on you so fast your head will spin. They'll fine you, they'll sue you, they'll make your life miserable. This tractor of yours? I'll make sure it's banned from ever coming near this neighborhood again. I looked her dead in the eye, refusing to flinch. You hit my tractor, Karen. That's the reality. No HOA rulebook is going to erase that fact. My voice was steady, calm, the exact opposite of hers. That only made her angrier. She stomped away, arms flailing, muttering about conspiracies and favoritism. I could see the neighbors gathering now, a small crowd forming at the edge of the subdivision. Some of them whispered to each other, their faces pale with suppressed laughter. Karen had made plenty of enemies with her overzealous enforcement of HOA rules, and I could tell they were enjoying seeing her squirm. After a few minutes, Mark returned. All right, he said firmly, here's what's going to happen. Based on the evidence, this accident was caused by your vehicle, ma'am. You'll need to file a claim with your insurance for the damages. A tow truck is on its way for your car, since it's not safe to drive. His words dropped like a hammer, and the crowd murmured. Karen's face went crimson. No. Absolutely not. You can't tow my car. Do you know who I am? She screeched, stamping her foot like a child denied candy. Yes, ma'am, Mark replied evenly, you're the registered owner of this Lexus, and it's not operable in its current condition. The tow is necessary. He didn't budge, and I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. For once, justice wasn't a long, uphill battle. For once, someone had stood up to Karen's theatrics and refused to give in. When the tow truck arrived, rumbling down the road with its bright yellow lights flashing, Karen nearly lost her mind. She threw herself in front of her car, arms spread wide, shouting that they couldn't take it, that it was harassment, that she'd call her lawyer. The tow truck driver, a burly man with grease-stained hands, barely blinked. Lady, move out of the way, or I'll call the sheriff again, he said flatly. Eventually, Mark had to step in, guiding her aside while the driver hooked the chains under the Lexus and winched it up onto the flatbed. The sound of the ratcheting chains was like music to my ears. Neighbors clapped quietly, some even chuckled, though they tried to hide it. Karen covered her face with her hands, humiliated, her kingdom crumbling before her eyes. When the truck pulled away with her car strapped down like a defeated beast, she spun toward me one last time. This isn't over, she screamed, her voice breaking. You'll regret this. I swear you will. Then she stormed off, marching back toward her house, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. As the dust settled and the crowd dispersed, Mark turned to me with a half-smile. You handled that better than most would, he said. Don't let her get under your skin. People like her thrive on reaction. You did the right thing, took pictures, called it in, stayed calm. I nodded, grateful for his words, though a part of me knew Karen wasn't going to let it go. She wasn't built to accept defeat quietly. Still, for that moment, I savored the small victory. The farm stood strong, the harvest continued, and for once, the HOA queen bee had been stung by her own arrogance. The next morning, I was back in the fields before the sun had fully crested the horizon. Farming doesn't pause for drama, not even when the HOA's self-appointed queen nearly wrecks herself into your tractor. The dew glistened on the corn like a blanket of silver, and the air carried that crisp autumn chill that fills your lungs with sharp freshness. As the tractor roared back to life beneath me, I tried to push the memory of Karen's shrill voice out of my mind. The harvest couldn't wait. There were acres yet to finish, grain bins to fill, and deadlines to meet before the weather turned. But even as I worked, the events of yesterday replayed in my head, the crunch of metal, the flashing police lights, the sight of her Lexus being towed away like a wounded animal. It had been satisfying in the moment, sure, but deep down I knew it was only the beginning. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds and move on. She was the type to sharpen her claws and come back with vengeance. I had seen her do it before to neighbors who crossed her, people who painted their fences a shade too bold, or who left their Christmas lights up a week too long. She'd bury them under letters, fines, threats of liens, until they either caved or moved away. Her power came from persistence, from her willingness to be relentless where others just wanted peace. And now, after the humiliation she suffered in front of the neighborhood, I knew she would stop at nothing to make me pay. Sure enough, by the time I came in for lunch, sweaty and tired from the morning's work, I found a thick envelope taped to my front door. The HOA's logo was stamped at the top, bold and official looking, the kind of thing meant to scare people into compliance. I tore it open at the kitchen table while a plate of fried eggs and bacon cooled beside me. Inside was a letter full of legal jargon and accusations, unauthorized use of heavy machinery near subdivision property, excessive noise during non-permitted hours, creating safety hazards for residents. It was all nonsense, of course. Farming was protected by state right-to-farm laws, and no HOA had the authority to dictate when or how I worked my land. Still, reading it made my jaw clench. This was Karen's doing, no question. She had run straight from the scene of her accident to her precious HOA board, spinning her version of events until it sounded like I was some kind of outlaw threatening the community. I didn't bother to call them. That would only feed into her game. Instead, I gathered every piece of documentation I had, property deeds, zoning permits, state agricultural exemptions, and stacked them neatly in a binder. Farming taught you to be proactive. Weather could ruin your crops overnight, pests could chew through months of labor in days, and bureaucrats could bury you in red tape if you weren't ready. I wasn't about to let some HOA letter rattle me. Still, I knew this battle wasn't just about paperwork. Karen wanted a war of attrition, one where she wore me down with constant attacks until I broke. By late afternoon, the phone calls began. Neighbors rang me up, some apologetic, some curious, others quietly supportive. "We heard what happened with Karen," one said. "Honestly, she had it coming. We're sick of her antics." Another chuckled, telling me the tow truck story was already spreading through town like wildfire. Word travels fast in small communities, especially when it involves someone as notorious as her. For once, people weren't whispering about me as the farmer ruining the view. They were laughing at Karen, the mighty HOA leader whose arrogance had literally landed her in a ditch. But laughter doesn't stop lawsuits, and sure enough, the following week, another letter arrived. This one accused me of reckless endangerment and demanded immediate removal of all unsightly farm equipment within view of the subdivision. She had even attached blurry photos of my tractor parked near the property line, red circles drawn around it like it was evidence in a crime scene. It would have been laughable if it weren't so infuriating. She wasn't just trying to find me, she wanted to erase my livelihood, piece by piece, until I either surrendered or sold out. I wasn't alone, though. The farming community here runs deep, built on generations of families who faced droughts, floods, and greedy developers trying to swallow their land. When they heard what Karen was up to, folks started stopping by the farm. Old Man Jenkins brought over a stack of legal pamphlets on agricultural rights. My buddy Tom, who ran cattle on the other side of town, offered to help with the harvest so I could focus on fighting the paperwork storm. Even neighbors from the subdivision, people Karen had once terrorized, began quietly slipping me notes of encouragement. One woman even admitted she'd been fined for planting tulips instead of HOA-approved roses. "Don't let her win," she said, eyes wide with desperation. "If you stand up to her, maybe it'll give the rest of us courage too." That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the silos, I realized this wasn't just my fight anymore. Karen had built an empire of fear, one where people tiptoed around her rules to avoid becoming her next target. By standing firm, I wasn't just defending my tractor or my farm, I was showing everyone it was possible to push back. And that scared her more than anything else. Because bullies like Karen thrive on silence. The moment people start laughing at them instead of fearing them, their power begins to crumble. Still, I braced myself. I knew the worst was yet to come. The storm came faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Karen had turned the HOA board into her personal army. Letters arrived almost daily, each thicker and more ridiculous than the last. One accused me of air pollution because the tractor's exhaust supposedly drifted toward the subdivision. Another claimed the sound of my equipment constituted psychological harassment. She even filed a complaint that the smell of fresh-cut corn was offensive and disruptive to neighborhood harmony. It was absurd, like living inside a satire of suburban life. But behind the ridiculousness was a real danger, paperwork piling high, threats of legal action, and the creeping possibility of drawn-out court battles. Instead of cracking under the pressure, I doubled down. I met with a local attorney who specialized in agricultural rights, a woman named Sarah Hughes. She was sharp, blunt, and had no patience for HOA nonsense. When I spread the stack of letters across her office desk, she barely raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't have a leg to stand on," Sarah said confidently. "Right to farm laws protect you. Courts don't side with HOAs over farmers, especially when the farm predates the subdivision. What she's doing is harassment, plain and simple. If anything, you could countersue. Her words steadied me, gave me a sense of armor against the barrage of nonsense. While Sarah handled the legal end, I kept my focus on the harvest. The corn was coming in beautifully, each ear heavy and golden, filling the grain bins with the promise of profit. The land gave me strength, grounding me in ways that paperwork never could. When I felt my frustration boil, I'd grip the tractor wheel tighter and remind myself, this machine, this soil, this harvest, this is real. The HOA, their papers, their rules, that was just noise. Still, every time I drove near the subdivision, I could feel Karen's eyes on me. Sometimes I'd catch her standing at the end of her driveway, arms folded, glaring as if she could burn holes through the steel of my tractor. Other times, I'd see her sneaking photos with her phone, probably rushing back to the HOA office to file yet another complaint. Then came the town meeting. Karen had managed to get herself on the agenda, lobbying for stricter enforcement of property standards adjacent to residential zones. It was code for one thing, me. I knew I couldn't skip it, so I cleaned up after a long day in the fields and headed to the community center. The room was packed, neighbors, farmers, curious townsfolk. Karen strutted to the front like a politician, papers clutched in her manicured hands, her voice dripping with righteous fury. "Ladies and gentlemen, our neighborhood is under siege," she declared, pointing dramatically toward me as if I were a wanted criminal. "This man's reckless use of machinery endangers our families. His outdated farming practices pollute our air, devalue our homes, and threaten the peace we've worked so hard to maintain." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded along, but many rolled their eyes, already weary of her theatrics. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't match her dramatics. I stood calmly, hat in hand, and said, "This land has been farmed by my family for 3 generations. My tractor didn't move into this neighborhood, the neighborhood moved in next to my tractor. Farming is loud, dirty, and sometimes smelly, but it's also what feeds us. Without it, there wouldn't be much of a town to argue about." My words weren't fancy, but they were true. And truth has a way of cutting through noise. To my surprise, applause broke out, not just from farmers, but from residents too. A few even stood up and spoke against Karen, recounting how she had fined them for petty things, how she bullied rather than led. It was as if the dam had cracked, years of pent-up frustration spilling out into the open. Karen's face twisted in fury, her carefully built facade crumbling as she realized the room wasn't hers to command anymore. She tried to shout over them, waving her papers, but the more she ranted, the smaller she looked. The council members didn't vote in her favor that night. In fact, one of them suggested reviewing the HOA's practices altogether. It wasn't a full victory, Karen still had her claws in plenty of places, but it was a turning point. For the first time, she wasn't untouchable. For the first time, people weren't just laughing at her behind closed doors, they were standing up to her in public. Of course, that only made her angrier. The very next morning, a police cruiser pulled up my driveway. My stomach tightened, but when Deputy Mark stepped out, he wasn't there to accuse me. He looked almost apologetic. "Karen filed another report," he said. "Claims you threatened her at the meeting, said you were going to bury her in corn." He rolled his eyes as he said it. "Obviously, I know it's bogus, but I still have to check." I laughed, shaking my head. "The only thing I buried last night was my boots in the mud," I told him. We both chuckled, but underneath, I knew this was the new normal. Karen had lost her grip on the crowd, so now she would try to drag me through the system, filing report after report until someone, anyone, took her side. It was harassment dressed up as civic duty. But every time she failed, her credibility sank lower, and the neighborhood's patience wore thinner. By the time harvest ended, I was exhausted, not just from the long days in the fields, but from the endless war of attrition. Yet as I looked over the bins filled to the brim with corn, I felt a deep pride. Despite everything, the land had provided. Despite Karen's chaos, the work was done. The farm stood strong. And maybe, just maybe, so did I. Winter rolled in not long after harvest ended, blanketing the fields in frost and turning the soil hard underfoot. Farming slows in those months, shifting from the roar of tractors to the quieter rhythm of maintenance, planning, and waiting for spring. Normally, it's a season of peace. But peace was never something Karen allowed. Even with her Lexus gone for weeks in the repair shop, she was relentless. She filed noise complaints when I split firewood. She called the county to claim my barn violated building codes. She even went as far as reporting my rooster for disturbing the neighborhood at dawn. Every day, it seemed, she was testing another. One man joked that she must have nightmares about green paint and diesel engines. When it was her turn to speak, she ranted for nearly an hour about how I was terrorizing the community with my tractor, how the accident had scarred her, how the smell of corn husks made her sick. The judge listened politely, scribbling notes, but his expression remained unreadable. When it was my turn, I kept it simple. I handed over As for the accident, the police report clearly places fault on your driving. Case dismissed. The gavel came down like thunder, and the courtroom buzzed. Karen's mouth hung open, her face red as a beet. She sputtered, tried to argue, but the judge had already moved on to the next case. Sarah leaned over to me with a grin. "That's game over," she whispered. And she was right. Legally, Karen had just lost her biggest card. Without the court's backing, her campaign collapsed like a house of cards in the wind. After that, things shifted quickly. The HOA board, tired of her embarrassing them, voted her out of her position as president. Neighbors who once cowered under her rules started planting whatever flowers they wanted, parking their RVs in driveways, and decorating their yards without fear. The subdivision loosened up, like a town finally free from curfew. And as for Karen, she retreated into her house, blinds drawn, sightings of her becoming rare. Rumor had it she was selling and planning to move, though no one knew where. Some said she couldn't stand living in a place where she had lost control. Others whispered she was running from the humiliation. Either way, she faded into the background, her reign finally broken. As for me, I kept farming. The spring came again, and with it, new planting, new hopes, and the endless cycle of the land. My tractor bore a scar from the accident, a dent along the side panel that I never bothered to repair. I kept it as a reminder, not of the conflict, but of the victory. It was proof that no amount of pettiness or bullying could uproot the strength of honest work. Sometimes, when the evening sun cast long shadows across the corn, I'd sit on the porch and think about how it all unfolded. How one woman's arrogance had sparked a battle that ended up uniting a community against her. How a single dent on a tractor became the crack that broke her crown. The police tow, the courtroom, the board meetings, all of it became stories I'd tell over coffee with neighbors, lessons in persistence and patience. Because in the end, Karen had taught me something valuable. Not about farming, I already knew how to work the land. But about standing your ground, about not letting fear of confrontation silence you. She had tested me in ways I never expected, and instead of breaking, I had grown stronger. And so, as the seasons rolled on and the farm continued to thrive, I carried on with a sense of pride deeper than ever. I was the farmer who outlasted the HOA's fiercest Karen, the man who watched her car get towed after she hit my tractor, the neighbor who proved that honesty and grit outlive arrogance and control. Life moved on, but that memory remained, etched into the steel of my machine, and into the hearts of everyone who had watched it all unfold.